They're looking at the 6 billion other consumers that don't live here, who are their potential future markets, because this economy, from their perspective, doesn't have those opportunities. It's dead. They want to go where people are changing from bicycles to automobiles, and that's the rest of the world. People have asked me, about my father. He was lost on a plane with Hale Boggs in the early 70s. Hale was a majority leader at the time. I mean, you can look at all of the interesting coincidences. The guy that took Hale Boggs to the airport, he was working in Texas at the time for another campaign, and Boggs got a ride to the airport by a young Democrat from Oklahoma, William Jefferson Clinton. Yeah, the same one that later became president. Now, this is 1972. Now, Boggs gets on the plane, he goes to D.C., makes a connection to Alaska, comes to Alaska, gives a speech, breaks the story a little bit about what was coming. We didn't know, it wasn't known as Watergate then, it was just this big scandal that he mentioned. And the next day he gets on a plane flying to Juneau from Anchorage and disappears and never heard from again with my father. Now, Boggs was on the Warren Commission. He wanted the Warren Commission reopened. It was saying so around that time. 6 months before, he had called for the resignation of Hoover, who he believed absolutely corrupt. Because of his own perversions, Hoover's, he used knowledge to blackmail the Congress. He had the inside track on every congressman because he had tapped their phones, intercepted their mail, basically violated all their personal privacy rights. And this was the leadership of the country, for goodness sakes. This is our entire Congress that he corrupted so that he could maintain his position in the FBI. Boggs wanted him out. Boggs came to Alaska. By then Hoover was gone, but the plane disappears, the Hoover administration continues, the Warren Commission never reopens, and Watergate breaks 3 weeks later. October 16th, 1972, the plane goes down. McGovern's in his last throes of his death race because he isn't winning anything. Richard Nixon's the clear winner. Everybody knows it. Hale Boggs is a majority leader of the House, standing in line to be the next speaker, the third most powerful position in the Congress. And what happens? He disappears at the most critical time in our history. In fact, if you remember, what happened right after Watergate broke and then Agnew got bounced, as the vice president? Ford slid in behind him. Nixon resigns. Ford moves up. Ford pardons Nixon, and Rockefeller rolls in as the vice president. And then, if you remember, it was, I think it was Squeaky Fromm, wasn't it Squeaky Fromm? It was one of the Manson girls that takes a pot shot at Ford to knock him off because she wanted him dead, and who would have been president? Rockefeller. Now, isn't that interesting? Talk about conspiracy theory. How about conspiracy reality? That's how it played out. Everybody's forgotten it. If you're not 50, you don't remember. But a lot of us remember when all this happened and it played out. Now Boggs is off the scene. Carl Elbert is the speaker. Carl was an alcoholic. He's come to my house all the time, talked to my dad. The guy could barely sit on a bar stool, and he was Speaker of the House. Those were the days when you got stopped by the police for drunk driving, and they said, "Hey, drive on home and sleep it off." It was a different world in a different era. But Carl Elbert was not in a position at that time to step into the President of the United States. What I think would have happened had Boggs lived, Carl Elbert would have stepped down, Boggs would have stepped up, they would have got rid of Agnew and Nixon at the same time, and the third in line to be president would have been, and that would have been Hale Boggs, and the whole game would have changed in this country. And personal freedom and liberty would have been restored then, instead of going into disrepair even further now. Now, Dad brought Boggs to Alaska to campaign. Dad had that campaign in the bag. He brought him here to show him, to talk about the same issues, many of the same issues that we've talked about over this video. The idea that Alaska has this tremendous potential for the United States that ought to be realized. This was right before the native land claims, the biggest settlement in indigenous history in the United States. As a freshman congressman, my dad got passed a 44 million acre land transfer to indigenous people intact with mineral rights, oil and gas rights, energy rights, timber, surface estate, water rights, everything intact. And they moved that over along with just under $1 billion in 1971, the first year he was a member of Congress as a freshman. Now, people say freshmen can't get anything done. I know personally they're wrong. My brother Mark is a freshman senator, 2 years in the job. He's the 5th ranking Democrat in the U.S. Senate and the only member of the U.S. Senate without a college degree. He did it in 2 years because he knows how to work hard, stand for something, and do something. Now, Mark and I don't agree on everything, as brothers never do, but I can tell you this. He's as committed to public service as I am. We have a different way of expressing it. But his risk at getting something done is as greater as they've ever been. You know, when you think about congressional deaths, you know, you think about my dad's, what happened is they found out in 1993 through FOIA requests that the military actually knew that my father or somebody at that crash site was alive. 2 people were alive, according to the FBI records that eventually got released. 2 people were alive at a crash site that has never been found. Crash site's never been publicly identified, nor has the people who were alive at that site. Lost in the shuffle of bureaucracy. The documents we saw that Roll Call, prestigious publication in D.C., got under a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, all the key names were redacted. When we went after the data from the military, the Air Force overflights, the data that was developed for the biggest air and sea search in the history of the world, and all the records they told us were destroyed. A few months later, because we raised a lot of heck over that, a few months later, mysteriously on my brother's doorstep, a pile of boxes with all those original documents, not redated. Gee, they hadn't been destroyed at all. We've been lied to again. I want to tell you, as the son of a United States congressman, that if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. That's why we need to get into this fight and engage our government. It shouldn't happen to anyone that our risk to our personal freedom, to our life, should be at risk as people give up their private life in order to carry on everyone else's. In the case of Wellstone, many remember his plane crash in Eveleth, Minnesota. You know, it just happened to be the same town my dad was born in. My uncle was a mayor there, was a state legislature there. Coincidence? Kind of interesting. Do you remember Carnahan, the senator before him that died in Missouri? That was the anniversary date of my dad's disappearance, October 16th. You know, is it coincidence? Maybe so, but it certainly begs the question, you know. I mean, how many people die in plane crashes? My brother beats Ted Stevens in an election. Ted Stevens dies in a plane crash a couple years later. What people don't remember is he was already in a plane crash before where his first wife was killed, died in a plane crash. People forget about it. Mike Gravel's wife died in a plane crash. People forget about it. You know, people forget about all of this, and yet it keeps happening. And people say, well, you know, politicians fly a lot, you know, plane crashes a little disproportionate to the rest of the population. How about business travelers? You want to talk about people flying a lot. It seems to be one of the hazards of the job that congressmen and senators seem to die in plane crashes when they're about to make some of the biggest changes that the country needs. So, having said it, there's always risk involved, I suppose, in public service. But the questions become is, what risks are we taking as citizens? And what risks should we take? I mean, at least we should have our voices heard. At least we should speak out. At least we should participate in the activist organizations that we believe in, as long as they're functioning on reasonable, value-based approaches. I mean, violence isn't the answer. Certainly not the answer right now. That's the excuse the government needs to finally shut down what little is left of our personal liberty. Let's not give them that. But let's stay in the fight, and let's see what we can do together. Maybe we can, I believe we can, continue to make a difference as we actualize our own potentials and engage the fight from the standpoint of change.